Evolution never said people came from rocks. Please inform yourself better about atheism and evolution, because what you are saying is not. Atheists didn't believe my statement that evolution says life came from rocks. This is the truth. So let's look at why someone might be confused and not understand that that's the case. The reason is that in the discussion of evolution, they tend to focus very myopically upon simple things, such as Darwin claimed in The Descent of Man, that man came from apes, such as the transition from sea creatures to land mammals. So they focus on very small sections, and they rarely ever address the full scope of the evolution of life as they propose it. So let's take a look at some of the examples. Sometimes in the discussion of evolutionary theory, we see a transition within one kind. So for example, here we see this Spanish language version of hippo becoming another hippo, becoming medium-sized hippo, becoming small hippo. Here is a sketch from Haeckel, the German Darwin. He ends with man at the top of the tree, but begins only with Manera, an old kingdom, and he does not show anything which preceded the beginning of life. Here's an example of a popular discussion in evolution, the transition from the oceans, which expanded from the primordial soup, onto land. So here's a picture. They're just showing some creatures assigned to different time frames, and you're left to assume what the relationship is. Did they evolve forward toward land, and did they then revolve or devolve back into the sea? That's actually a theory that's going around. So here you have a picture, but again, it's isolated. It's truncated at two ends, so you don't really see that they're saying, hey, it goes back to the primordial soup, which came from rain upon the rocks, which comes from rocks. So in review, what we see is that the discussion of evolution often focuses on one small aspect of a much broader picture, and they almost always avoid, because it's critical, it's basically the death of the evolutionary theory, that they cannot explain how inanimate matter ever at any time became alive. There's simply no explanation for it at all. So to avoid that, you just avoid discussing that portion. As evolution absolutely says that, sometime 13 or 35 billion years ago, depending upon whose theory you like or who's most popular this month, there was a big bang and stuff spread out through space, and then about 13.5 million years ago, rain started to fall on the rocks and produced a primordial soup. So you have this first massive amount of time, 20 billion years, simply for gas to form a planet and an atmosphere, right? So it takes tens of billions of years for that part, and then, just 3.4 billion years ago, and you might have a different number, but something like that, right? But it's not 10 billion, right? So it's something like 3.5 billion years ago, the primordial soup happens, right? And so now this forms some amino acids, right? This is the famous Urey-MIller experiment, which I've been researching now, is full of all kinds of issues. But so they claim this, and now at some point this magically comes alive. It forms a micelle or something, and then plus magic. I don't know who sprinkled the magic on, but magic comes in, and now they're even starting to say, well, yeah, we really can't explain it, but maybe these elements came from a meteorite. So now they're just transferring the explanation for where life comes from to some other place, well, how does entropy work? Well, you just go bigger and bigger and bigger to some place that no one has ever seen or observed, and then just insist that it happened there, right? Well, that's where it balances out, where no one has ever observed, and no one in our lifetime is ever going to observe, so that's where entropy goes. Evolution, given enough time. No, it's not actually given enough time. It's just 3.5 billion years. So let me give you this little piece of math. I've looked and I found the oldest, human settlement somewhere in Turkey, and it's 300,000 years ago. So you take 3 billion and you divide it by 300,000, you just get 10,000. So what did those men look like compared to Turkish people today? Pretty much the same. Their heads were a little larger than Europeans. Their teeth were a little larger. I found a study on Turkish people living today, and that's about the case. Their brains are like 1.5% larger. Their teeth are also like 4% larger, something like this. So it matches these fossils that they found in this Turkish place. So 300,000. So now you get 10,000 units. So now let's look at how much change happened between this 300,000-year-old settlement and the modern Turks. And it's basically zero. And if you want to say it's a little bit, you don't know how it worked. Maybe they had a lot of change and now they're coming back down, and now maybe the skulls are a little bit smaller than they were then. But also, why would you expect, I thought that we were moving from smaller skulls to larger skulls. Isn't that the trend? Isn't that the trend line that we see? But they're saying 300,000 years ago, the skulls were larger. Well, that's interesting. So there has to be some kind of something like this if you're going to, explain this kind of fossil evidence. So you only get 10,000 of those. That's the amount of change you have. You don't know which way this is going, but basically it's the same kind of a human. In 300,000 years, the change is almost zero. In 300,000 years. So you only have 10,000 of those segments. So 10,000 times some really small number is not a lot of evolution according to Darwin's model, Darwin's mechanism that he proposed, which is the aggregation of small adaptive changes. Does that make sense to you? Do you think that this small change between this old Turkish fossils and modern Turks today, that if you multiply that tiny change times just 10,000, you see, because when you say, given enough time, no one thinks in terms of the infinite. Well, how much money have I got to spend for the weekend? Ooh, infinite, great. Looks like it's going to be a great time, right? No one has infinite. How much more time do I have before this project is due? Ooh, infinite, fantastic. We don't think in terms of infinite. Someone just starts saying like, given enough time, it's some huge number that you're not going to be able to think about. But I have this little tool for you. We'll take one basic unit back to the furthest man that they've identified, according to them, 300,000 years, and just make that one unit. Of those units, you have just 10,000 of them. Well, how much change happens in that unit? Almost none. And you don't know which way it's going. Some things say that it's going this way, some say it's going this way. So it's close to zero. How much change is happening is close to zero. And you multiply that times 10,000, you get not a lot of change. Just not a lot. So you have to find some ways to think about it. Sit down yourself and draw out what you think happened in evolution and try to assign some times to it, and then see if you think that's enough time for all of these small changes to happen. Because if you just do it that way, it doesn't add up. This is the man from Modesto reminding Christians, as always, to pray or be defeated. And for those of you who consider yourself to be the masters of logic and the champions of academia, I encourage you to not just go look up what someone else says, but to think of your own metrics and dig into those. If someone says, well, this is the case, then ask yourself, if that was true, what would I find? And then go and find some raw data and assess it yourself. That's the best way to really know if something's true or not. Don't let someone else tell you. You go and find out. Scientists have not been able to explain how inanimate rocks transformed into the building blocks of life.